Lieutenant Sarah Miller walked through the tall, polished doors of the naval headquarters, her heart steady but her mind alert. The room was buzzing with activity. Admirals in crisp uniforms exchanged quiet conversations, decorated officers adjusted their medals, and aides hurried back and forth carrying papers and digital tablets. It was a high-security event, the kind where every movement was watched and every word could matter. Despite the tension in the air, Sarah felt calm. Years of training had taught her how to carry herself in situations like this. She had seen combat zones, stormed enemy positions, and survived operations that few even knew existed. Yet here she was, among some of the most respected people in the Navy, and all anyone seemed to notice at first was that she was young, small, and relatively unknown. As she moved further into the room, Sarah could feel the eyes on her. Some looked curious, others skeptical. It wasn't unusual. People often judged her based on her appearance rather than her record. Many assumed she was just another junior officer trying to navigate her first big event. That thought alone motivated Sarah to keep her composure and project quiet confidence. She walked with a straight back, her uniform perfectly pressed, and her shoes making a soft but deliberate tap on the marble floor. Every step reminded her that she belonged here, even if others hadn't realized it yet. Near the center of the room, a group of officers had gathered around a Navy SEAL known for his bravado and quick jokes. His presence was intimidating to many, not because he was unkind, but because he carried himself with an aura of toughness only earned through years of missions in hostile environments. He spotted Sarah moving through the crowd and, with a grin, decided to make a light-hearted remark. He called out, "Hey, what's your rank, Lieutenant?" There was a teasing tone in his voice, and it was clear he expected either a playful response or an embarrassed laugh. Sarah didn't flinch. She turned toward him with a calm expression, her eyes steady, and replied clearly, "Lieutenant." There was no hesitation, no fake laugh, no attempt to hide her authority. It was a simple statement, but in that moment it carried weight. The SEAL expected a reaction, maybe a stammer or a sheepish grin, but instead, he got poise and quiet confidence. A few officers nearby chuckled lightly, thinking it was just a funny little exchange, unaware of the layers hidden beneath her calm demeanor. What they didn't know was that Sarah carried far more than a rank on her shoulders. Hidden under her uniform were scars, experiences, and a history of missions that were classified at the highest levels. She had operated in places most officers could only read about in top-secret briefings. And while she didn't flaunt these achievements, there was a presence about her, a sense of experience and authority that drew attention even before she spoke. The SEAL's joke, meant to entertain the crowd, unknowingly gave Sarah the perfect opportunity to reveal herself, not through words, but through subtle confidence and posture. She moved with a natural ease, a quiet command that hinted at her capability. Even without speaking of her missions or showing medals, people could sense that she wasn't ordinary. Her gaze was calm but piercing, her steps deliberate but relaxed. Everyone who looked at her felt, even subconsciously, that there was more to this young officer than met the eye. As the crowd continued its polite chatter, Sarah subtly adjusted her sleeve, a gesture that seemed casual but was loaded with significance. The SEAL, still smiling, didn't notice it at first. To him, she was just another officer in a room full of powerful people. But some of the admirals, sharp-eyed and experienced, caught a glimpse of the hint of a tattoo on her arm. It was not just any tattoo, it was a symbol few had ever seen, representing missions that were highly classified. Those who recognized it immediately stiffened, their expressions shifting from casual conversation to stunned recognition. Sarah's calm demeanor never faltered. She knew the effect her presence could have, and she carried herself in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. Every detail, the way she stood, the way she held herself, even the subtle movements of her hands, spoke volumes about her training, discipline, and experience. By the time she reached the center of the room, several officers had begun whispering to each other, their eyes wide with curiosity and respect. The SEAL finally noticed the small, subtle marking on her forearm. His grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. For a moment, the room seemed to pause. Everyone who understood the meaning of the symbol realized that this young lieutenant was not just another junior officer. They were in the presence of someone extraordinary. It was a quiet, tense moment, but it carried a powerful weight. Appearances could be deceiving, and experience often hid behind the most unassuming faces. Sarah remained composed, aware of the attention she had drawn but unfazed by it. She didn't need to boast about her achievements or make anyone feel small. Her mere presence, her confident posture, and that small hint of a tattoo spoke louder than words ever could. In that room full of admirals and seasoned officers, Sarah had already made her mark. And this was just the beginning. The room was still humming with the low murmur of conversations when the Navy SEAL leaned closer, his tone playful and teasing. "So, Lieutenant, you're really a lieutenant, huh?" he said with a half-smile, expecting a reaction that would match the joke. The others around them chuckled lightly, enjoying the casual moment. To most of them, it was just another playful exchange in a room full of officers trying to relax amid the formal atmosphere. They didn't yet know that this little joke would become a turning point in the way everyone in the room perceived Sarah. Sarah Miller, however, didn't laugh or look flustered. Her face stayed calm, her posture unshaken. She met his gaze evenly, a quiet confidence radiating from her. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady. She didn't add unnecessary words, didn't try to soften the moment with humor. To the untrained eye, it seemed like just a matter-of-fact reply. But to those who paid attention, there was a subtle power in the way she answered. A power that spoke of years of discipline, rigorous training, and hard-earned experience in missions few had even heard about. The SEAL had expected an easy target for his joke, someone who might giggle, blush, or respond with self-deprecating humor. He expected to get a laugh at her expense. Instead, he was met with composure and directness that he hadn't anticipated. His smirk wavered for the briefest moment, just enough for a few officers nearby to notice that something was different. Sarah's presence, which had already been quietly commanding, now subtly demanded respect. For a few seconds, the room seemed to slow. People who had been casually chatting or observing from a distance now found themselves drawn into this small interaction. Some officers exchanged glances, sensing there was more to this young lieutenant than anyone had guessed. They began to notice the little details, the way she held her hands, the steadiness in her gaze, the calm confidence in her posture. Even though she hadn't spoken much, she had already shifted the energy in the room. The SEAL, still smiling but now slightly off guard, tried to maintain the playful tone. "I guess you really do take this rank seriously, huh?" he said, attempting to regain control of the joke. But Sarah's response was not just in her words. It was in her calm demeanor, her quiet authority. She didn't need to elaborate or explain. Her presence alone made it clear she was someone who had earned every bit of her position. Her training had taught her to project confidence without arrogance, to show competence without boasting, and to command respect without intimidation. As the conversation continued, Sarah subtly moved her sleeve, exposing just a hint of the tattoo on her forearm. It was barely noticeable to anyone unfamiliar with it, but for those who knew the symbol, it carried immense weight. The tattoo was more than a piece of ink. It was a mark of her involvement in highly classified operations, missions that few officers could even discuss openly. Those who recognized it immediately shifted their attention, their eyes widening slightly, their expressions changing from casual interest to astonishment. The SEAL, however, didn't notice it right away. He continued with his teasing, still trying to get a laugh out of the room. But when he finally glanced at her forearm, his expression changed. The smirk faltered, replaced by surprise and a hint of respect. For the first time, he realized that the lieutenant he had been joking with was not just a junior officer, but someone whose experiences and accomplishments were far beyond what he had imagined. The playful tone of the room suddenly felt different. What had been light-hearted banter now carried an undercurrent of awe. The officers around them also began to sense it. Those who had laughed along at first now exchanged looks of recognition and respect. They whispered quietly to one another, aware that the tattoo represented a level of achievement and experience few could claim. Sarah's calm, unassuming presence had quietly transformed the room's perception of her. She had not raised her voice or flaunted her accomplishments. She had merely been herself, and that was enough to command attention and respect. Even as the SEAL recovered from his surprise, the atmosphere had changed. No one doubted Sarah's competence anymore, and those who had underestimated her realized their mistake. The young lieutenant, who had once been overlooked, had now become the focus of quiet admiration. Her ability to maintain composure under scrutiny, to project authority without arrogance, and to subtly reveal her accomplishments without boasting made her stand out in a room full of seasoned officers. The moment also taught a subtle lesson to the SEAL. What had started as a joke had turned into a moment of revelation. He now understood that Sarah's rank and presence were not things to underestimate. There was a depth to her experience that was invisible at first glance, a quiet strength that could not be measured by appearance or casual jokes. His respect for her grew instantly, and he became one of the first in the room to recognize that she was not someone to be taken lightly. By the end of this small exchange, Sarah had done more than answer a joke. She had shifted the energy in the room, commanded respect, and silently announced her presence as someone extraordinary. She did not need to raise her voice or declare her achievements. Her confidence, calmness, and subtle display of her classified tattoo spoke volumes. In just a few minutes, she had changed the way everyone, from seasoned admirals to playful SEALs, perceived her. And in a room filled with high-ranking officers, that was no small accomplishment. After the initial playful exchange, the atmosphere in the room had subtly shifted. The low murmur of conversations continued, but now there was a different energy around Lieutenant Sarah Miller. She walked with the same calm, measured steps, her presence quiet but commanding. While most people were still caught up in small talk and formal greetings, a few officers began to notice something unusual, a glimpse of a tattoo on her forearm, partially hidden beneath her neatly pressed sleeve. It was a small detail, barely noticeable if you weren't paying close attention, but for those who recognized it, the significance was immense. Sarah knew the power of subtlety. She wasn't there to boast or draw attention to herself. She had learned long ago that true authority didn't come from loud words or flashy displays. It came from quiet confidence and mastery of one's craft. As she casually adjusted her sleeve, the tattoo became slightly more visible. To most, it might have looked like a simple insignia, but to those with knowledge of classified operations, it was unmistakable. It symbolized missions that were top secret, covert, and executed with precision. Few officers had ever seen such a mark in person, and even fewer knew the person who wore it. The SEAL who had made the joke moments earlier still stood nearby, grinning and enjoying the playful moment. He had not yet noticed the tattoo, so he continued his teasing banter, expecting the room to remain lighthearted. Sarah, however, remained composed. She didn't draw attention to herself. She let the small reveal of the tattoo speak for her. It was a silent statement, a symbol that carried weight far beyond rank or medals. The subtle movement of her sleeve was enough to startle those who knew its meaning. A few admirals, standing slightly apart from the crowd, caught sight of the tattoo. Their faces froze for a brief moment as recognition dawned. These were people who had seen countless officers come and go, who had briefed generals on missions across the globe, and who understood the significance of classified symbols. Yet here, standing in front of them, was someone far younger than they expected, and she bore a mark of experiences that most could only imagine. A quiet ripple of astonishment passed through the room. Sarah sensed the subtle attention but remained perfectly composed. She had faced far more dangerous and unpredictable situations in her career, hostile territories, life-or-death operations, and missions that required split-second decisions. A few curious glances from admirals or whispered murmurs from officers didn't shake her. Her calmness only made the realization of her accomplishments more striking to those watching. The contrast between her youthful appearance and the depth of her experience created a powerful tension in the room. The SEAL finally caught sight of the tattoo as he glanced at her forearm. His playful grin faltered for just a second. He had expected a light-hearted exchange, but this small symbol revealed something he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a mark of elite operations, missions that were rarely discussed even in classified briefings. He now realized that this young lieutenant had experiences and accomplishments far beyond what he had assumed. His demeanor shifted from casual amusement to genuine respect. The other officers in the room also began to take notice. Whispers started spreading quietly. "That's the mark from the Delta operation?" Or, "She was part of that mission in the Mediterranean." Those who recognized the symbol understood the danger, skill, and bravery it represented. They realized that the woman before them had been involved in missions that had shaped national security, and yet she carried it all with quiet humility. The room, which had moments ago been filled with casual laughter, now held a sense of awe and respect. Sarah didn't need to explain anything. Her experience was already evident through the combination of her posture, her calmness, and the subtle reveal of the tattoo. She had mastered the art of letting her actions and symbols speak louder than words. Every detail of her movement, the way she adjusted her sleeve, the steady calm in her gaze, the quiet confidence in her steps, communicated authority and competence. Those around her, especially the admirals and senior officers, began to see her in a completely new light. The SEAL, who had been joking just moments before, now looked at her with a mix of surprise and admiration. He understood in that instant that he had underestimated her. This wasn't just a young officer trying to make her way through a formal event. She was someone who had earned her place through dedication, skill, and courage. The playful moment had unintentionally become a turning point, revealing the depth of her experience in a subtle yet powerful way. For Sarah, this moment was familiar territory. She had been underestimated countless times throughout her career because of her age, gender, or quiet demeanor, but she had learned to let others underestimate her. The moment of recognition would come when it mattered, often in the form of subtle symbols, small actions, or quiet displays of competence. The room's reaction, the awe in the Admiral's eyes, and the sudden pause in the SEAL's joking were all proof that her strategy worked. By the time the murmurs had spread through the room, Sarah had already moved on to another group of officers, maintaining her composure as though nothing significant had happened. But the energy around her had shifted irrevocably. People who had previously dismissed her now whispered her name with respect. Even those who didn't fully understand the tattoo sensed that she had accomplished extraordinary feats. In a room full of highly decorated officers, she had quietly made herself the center of attention, not through arrogance or words, but through subtlety, presence, and the quiet power of her experiences. This moment, small as it seemed, set the tone for everything that would follow. The playful joke by the SEAL had unknowingly revealed the depth of Sarah's achievements. From that point onward, she was no longer just another lieutenant in the room. She was a figure of respect, someone whose experience and quiet authority could not be ignored. And while she would never seek the spotlight, the room now knew that Sarah Miller was someone extraordinary. The room, which had been lively with casual chatter and quiet laughter, suddenly fell into a subtle tension. Something had shifted, though not everyone realized it at first. Lieutenant Sarah Miller, moving with calm confidence, had revealed just a glimpse of the tattoo on her forearm. For most people, it would have been a small, insignificant mark. But to those who understood the military's deepest secrets, it was more than a tattoo. It was a symbol of extraordinary service, a mark that represented missions so classified that only a few in the entire Navy could truly comprehend them. The SEAL, who had been joking only moments before, suddenly stiffened. His playful grin disappeared, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. He had thought he was engaging in harmless fun, teasing a young officer he assumed was relatively inexperienced. But that small, carefully inked symbol told him a completely different story. This was no ordinary lieutenant. She had operated in environments and missions that were highly dangerous, highly secret, and extremely critical. The realization hit him like a sudden wave. He had underestimated her, and the weight of that mistake became instantly clear. Across the room, several admirals had noticed the subtle reveal. Their expressions shifted almost imperceptibly, but anyone paying attention could see the change. Eyes widened, jaws tightened slightly, and whispers began circulating among them. These were people who had briefed the highest levels of the Navy on covert operations, who had overseen classified missions, and yet even they recognized the magnitude of the symbol Sarah carried. In that instant, they understood that the young woman standing confidently before them had participated in missions that few had ever heard about, let alone witnessed firsthand. The energy in the room became charged with a mixture of astonishment and respect. Officers who had been chatting and laughing quietly now exchanged quick, meaningful glances. Some instinctively straightened their posture, a subconscious acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. Sarah, however, remained calm and composed. She didn't raise her voice or try to explain anything. She didn't need to. Her presence, her poise, and that single, almost hidden tattoo had done all the talking. The quiet authority she exuded commanded attention without demanding it, and those who understood the meaning of the symbol could not ignore her. The SEAL, recovering from his initial shock, tried to regain his composure. He opened his mouth as if to say something humorous, but the words faltered. He realized that joking now would be inappropriate. What had started as light teasing had become a moment of revelation. Sarah had subtly, without even trying, demonstrated her depth of experience and her credibility in a way that no words or boastful claims could have matched. The power of her calm, quiet authority had changed the room in an instant. Even officers who didn't fully understand the tattoo could sense the shift. They may not have known the specific operations it represented, but they could feel the room's sudden reverence for her. There was something undeniably commanding about the way she carried herself, a presence that demanded attention and respect without arrogance. It was as though the room itself had adjusted to acknowledge the weight of her achievements, even for those who didn't fully understand them. Sarah's experience had taught her the importance of timing, subtlety, and perception. She had faced countless high-stakes situations in her career, and she knew that respect was earned through quiet competence rather than loud declarations. This moment, where her tattoo silently revealed her accomplishments, was a perfect example. She had allowed others to underestimate her, and now, with a single understated gesture, she had completely transformed their perception. The contrast between her youthful appearance and the immense significance of her service made the revelation even more striking. Whispers started circulating more openly among the admirals and senior officers. Names of operations, some classified and known only to a select few, were murmured in astonishment. "She was part of the mission in the South Pacific," one officer whispered. "She completed that operation in hostile territory," another added. The murmurs weren't meant to be heard by everyone, but the impact of her presence was undeniable. Sarah had achieved what few could in such an environment. She had commanded respect and attention without raising her voice, without demanding recognition, simply by being who she was and allowing her record to speak through subtle means. The SEAL, now fully aware of the situation, nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and newfound respect. He realized that the lieutenant he had tried to tease moments ago was someone whose courage, skill, and achievements far surpassed anything he had assumed. In that instant, he understood the importance of humility, even among highly trained and confident military personnel. Sarah's calm, understated revelation had created a ripple effect of recognition and admiration that no words could replicate. By the time Sarah moved away from the center of the room, the reaction she had triggered continued to resonate. Officers whispered her name, some exchanging stories they had heard about her missions. Admirals adjusted their posture, acknowledging the presence of someone whose experience and accomplishments could not be ignored. The playful moment initiated by the SEAL had become a defining point in the event, marking the lieutenant as a figure of extraordinary capability and quiet authority. This was a turning point not only for the SEAL or the Admirals, but for the perception of Sarah herself. She had demonstrated, without fanfare or exaggeration, that appearances could be deceiving. Age, size, and outward demeanor meant nothing compared to skill, courage, and dedication. Her tattoo, a small but powerful symbol, had conveyed more in a few seconds than any speech could have done in hours. It was proof that experience, competence, and subtle confidence would always command respect, even in the most formal and high-pressure settings. The room had already fallen into a quiet, respectful hush. But Sarah Miller didn't let it affect her. She moved calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everyone around her was keenly aware that something extraordinary had happened. Her posture was perfect, her head held high, and her eyes scanned the room with serene confidence. Even in a room full of admirals, decorated officers, and elite Navy SEALs, she seemed completely unshaken. It was a type of authority that demanded respect without force, a kind of quiet power that few could resist acknowledging. The subtle reveal of her tattoo had already created waves of recognition and awe, but Sarah didn't speak about it. She didn't need to. The symbol itself communicated everything that mattered. She had been part of critical, high-risk missions that were classified at the highest levels, missions that required intelligence, courage, and precision. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a small, simple design, but for those who understood its meaning, it was evidence of experiences that few officers, no matter how senior, could claim. The quiet confidence with which she carried herself only amplified the impact. As she stood there, the SEAL who had been joking earlier realized the gravity of the situation. He had expected to engage in playful banter with a young officer, but now he understood that Sarah was far more than he, or anyone in the room, had anticipated. His smile faded into a look of astonishment mixed with respect. He studied her carefully, noticing the way she held herself, the calmness in her gaze, and the subtle strength in every gesture. She wasn't just competent. She was exceptional. The admirals, too, were reacting in ways that spoke volumes. Their stiff posture softened slightly, and their whispered conversations carried tones of astonishment and recognition. A few officers who had initially doubted her, simply because of her youth or quiet demeanor, now looked at her with wide eyes and subtle nods of acknowledgement. It was as though a veil had been lifted. They could now see what had been hidden beneath her unassuming exterior. Sarah had become a living reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet competence often spoke louder than bravado. Sarah's approach was deliberate. She knew that in a room filled with high-ranking officers, true respect was earned through subtlety and calm authority. She didn't need to explain her missions or her experiences. Doing so would diminish the quiet power of her presence. Instead, she allowed the small reveal of her tattoo, combined with her composed demeanor, to communicate everything she wanted to say. Every officer who recognized the symbol immediately understood the level of skill, courage, and trust it represented. A few officers whispered to one another, exchanging fragments of stories they had heard about Sarah's missions. Some murmured about operations in hostile territories, others about strategic missions that had required precision and secrecy. The room, which had moments ago been filled with casual conversation and polite chatter, now felt charged with a mix of respect and awe. People who had underestimated her were quickly learning that she was far beyond what they had imagined. Even the SEAL, who had been confident and playful just moments earlier, was now in quiet admiration. He realized that his initial joke had been misplaced and that Sarah's abilities far exceeded anything he had expected. She had shown him, without a single boast or wordy explanation, that competence, courage, and experience could not be measured by appearances or rank alone. Her calm, controlled demeanor had revealed a depth of experience that few could match, and it left everyone in the room reassessing their assumptions. Sarah's quiet authority became the center of attention without her seeking it. People naturally gravitated toward her, drawn by the subtle aura of confidence she projected. She didn't need to assert dominance or seek recognition. The room acknowledged her on its own. This was a skill she had honed over years of training and missions, understanding that true leadership was about influence, presence, and the ability to inspire trust quietly. Some officers, still processing the revelation, began to look at her differently. They realized that she wasn't just a competent officer. She was someone who could be relied upon in the most critical situations, someone whose judgment and skill were beyond reproach. Her calmness under scrutiny, her poise, and the understated display of her tattoo had all combined to create an image of someone truly exceptional. At this point, Sarah had achieved something remarkable. She had transformed the perception of everyone in the room without speaking more than a few words. The SEAL who had teased her now stood with newfound respect, Admirals and officers whispered in recognition, and even those who hadn't fully understood the significance of the tattoo could sense the quiet power of her presence. In less than a few minutes, she had moved from being underestimated to commanding respect from some of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. Sarah continued to move through the room, interacting politely with others, but always with that same calm, controlled presence. She allowed the realization of her accomplishments to settle naturally in the minds of those around her. She didn't need to announce her achievements or demand acknowledgement. Her actions, demeanor, and the subtle tattoo had already done that. This was the moment when Sarah truly showed her quiet authority. She demonstrated that true respect is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes, subtlety can be far more powerful than loud declarations. By remaining composed, confident, and understated, she had turned a moment that could have been embarrassing or awkward into one of awe and recognition. She had quietly reminded everyone present that experience, skill, and courage cannot be measured by appearances, and that the most extraordinary individuals often leave the strongest impressions without ever seeking them. The subtle tension that had begun moments earlier continued to ripple through the room. Lieutenant Sarah Miller moved with a calm, steady rhythm, interacting with others in a quiet, professional manner, but the energy surrounding her had shifted entirely. What had started as a playful joke by the Navy SEAL had now turned into something much more significant. Officers whispered in low tones, exchanging glances that betrayed their astonishment. Admirals and senior officers who had initially underestimated Sarah were now processing a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about her. She was no longer just a young lieutenant moving through the room. She was someone whose presence demanded respect. The SEAL, who had joked about her rank just minutes ago, now stood slightly apart, watching her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had realized, perhaps too late, that he had completely misjudged her. The playful smirk that had accompanied his joke had vanished, replaced by a solemn recognition of her extraordinary abilities. He began to understand the depth of experience and courage represented by the small tattoo on her forearm, which symbolized missions so classified that even most high-ranking officers would only hear about them in briefings. Around the room, whispers began to grow more focused. Officers who had only recently noticed the tattoo now exchanged fragments of what they knew. She was part of that critical operation overseas, one officer murmured to another. She completed missions that were classified at the highest level. Another added. Every word carried astonishment. The realization that someone so young, so seemingly unassuming, had contributed to some of the Navy's most sensitive operations left the room in awe. What had been a playful gathering had transformed into an environment of quiet respect and curiosity. Despite the growing attention, Sarah maintained her composure. She had learned long ago that true authority did not require boasting, explaining, or proving oneself to others. It was in the quiet confidence of her presence, the calm control over her own demeanor, and the subtle display of her achievements that she commanded recognition. She had always known that actions, rather than words, carry the greatest weight. And now, even without saying much, she had done exactly that. The SEAL, still absorbing the revelation, finally spoke, but this time with a completely different tone. His voice was quieter, more respectful. "I had no idea," he admitted. It was a rare moment for someone like him, who was accustomed to commanding attention and respect, to acknowledge surprise and admiration openly. His playful demeanor had given way to genuine respect, and the shift in his attitude did not go unnoticed by the others in the room. Sarah had quietly altered the dynamics of the entire gathering. The admirals, who had been observing from their positions of authority, also began to react more openly. They exchanged subtle nods and quick whispers, recognizing the significance of her service. Many had seen the outcomes of covert missions, read reports, and briefed top officials on matters of national security, but very few had encountered an officer who had participated in such high-level operations at such a young age. The realization sparked a mix of admiration and awe, as the room collectively acknowledged that Lieutenant Miller was someone extraordinary. Some officers who had initially doubted her abilities, assuming that her youth and quiet demeanor meant she was inexperienced, now found themselves reassessing everything they thought they knew. The transformation in perception was remarkable. Respect, once uncertain or absent, had now become the prevailing sentiment. The room's energy, once casual and light, now carried a sense of reverence. Sarah had shifted the perception of everyone around her without raising her voice or making grand declarations. Her authority was quiet but undeniable. Sarah's strategic use of subtlety and timing was evident. She had allowed the seal's joke to occur, knowing that it would provide an opportunity to reveal just enough to shift perceptions dramatically. She had moved with natural ease, adjusted her sleeve to reveal the tattoo, and maintained perfect composure throughout. Every small action had been deliberate, designed to convey competence, experience, and quiet authority. In the minds of those around her, it became clear that she had achieved something rare. She had earned admiration without asking for it, respect without demanding it. As the murmurs continued, Sarah moved gracefully through the room, acknowledging greetings and responding with polite, professional courtesy. Her calm demeanor, combined with the subtle but powerful display of her achievements, created an aura of quiet authority. People naturally gravitated toward her, drawn by the respect she inspired and the curiosity her reputation provoked. Admirals who had once overlooked her now spoke to her with deference, and officers who had doubted her abilities now sought her insight. The room, which had once treated her as just another lieutenant, now recognized her as someone exceptional. The SEAL, now fully aware of her accomplishments, silently acknowledged the lesson he had learned. He realized that assumptions based on appearances could be dangerously misleading, and that true skill and bravery often lie beneath the surface, invisible until revealed at the right moment. Sarah had demonstrated not only her own extraordinary competence, but also the value of humility, subtlety, and strategic revelation. By the end of the evening, the impact of that small tattoo and Sarah's quiet confidence had spread throughout the room. The whispering officers, the attentive admirals, and even the humbled SEAL had come to understand the depth of her experience. Sarah Miller had not just participated in high-level operations. She had mastered the art of commanding respect and inspiring awe in the most understated and powerful way possible. Her presence, calm yet commanding, had ensured that everyone in the room would remember her, not just for her rank or youth, but for the extraordinary strength and skill she carried quietly beneath the surface. In a matter of minutes, a playful joke had transformed into a revelation of unparalleled respect. Sarah had subtly shifted perceptions, reminded everyone of the power of quiet competence, and established herself as a figure of authority and admiration. The lesson was clear. True capability is often invisible until revealed with skill and confidence, and the most extraordinary individuals rarely need to announce themselves. They simply allow their presence and actions to speak. By this point, the atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What had started as a casual, high-security event had become a scene of quiet awe and respect, all centered around Lieutenant Sarah Miller. The subtle reveal of her tattoo, combined with her calm and commanding presence, had left everyone, from seasoned admirals to elite officers and even the playful Navy SEAL, in a state of recognition and admiration. She had shown, without raising her voice or flaunting her accomplishments, that experience, skill, and courage could not be underestimated, and the room had taken notice. Sarah moved through the gathering with measured steps, acknowledging greetings politely, shaking hands, and offering small nods of courtesy. Each interaction she had reinforced the impression she had already made. Admirals who had once glanced at her with mild curiosity now spoke to her with genuine respect, listening intently to her words and occasionally seeking her opinion on matters they might otherwise have dismissed as trivial for a junior officer. It was subtle, but the difference in how people interacted with her was clear. Sarah had transitioned from being underestimated to being regarded as an authority figure. Even the SEAL, who had teased her earlier, could no longer maintain his playful demeanor. He stood slightly to the side, observing her, and for the first time recognized the weight of her achievements. The initial joke had been a misstep, and he silently acknowledged the lesson he had learned. Never judge someone by appearances, words, or initial impressions. Sarah's quiet confidence and the significance of her tattoo had revealed a depth of experience that few could claim, and he now regarded her with genuine admiration. The whispering among the admirals and senior officers grew more audible, though still discreet. Some shared brief stories or fragments of operations they knew Sarah had been involved in, careful not to breach any classified boundaries. The conversations were filled with respect, awe, and a shared understanding of the dangers and challenges she had faced. These whispers weren't idle gossip. They were acknowledgments of extraordinary accomplishment, a recognition of someone whose bravery and skill had directly impacted critical missions. Sarah didn't need to participate in these conversations. Her presence alone spoke volumes, and those around her instinctively communicated their respect. What made Sarah's influence so remarkable was the way she achieved it without seeking attention. She didn't raise her voice or emphasize her past accomplishments. She didn't try to dominate the room or demand recognition. Instead, she allowed subtle signals, the calm confidence in her posture, the measured tone of her voice, the small but meaningful reveal of her tattoo, to communicate her extraordinary abilities. Every officer, every admiral, and every observer could sense that this young lieutenant was someone special. She had mastered the art of quiet leadership, where the strength of one's presence and actions outweighs any words or displays. A few junior officers, who had initially assumed that Sarah's youth meant inexperience, now looked at her in awe. They whispered to one another, expressing surprise and admiration for someone they had underestimated. "She's incredible. I can't believe how composed she is," one murmured. "And that tattoo. She must have done things I can't even imagine," said another. Sarah's influence extended beyond her peers and superiors. She had begun inspiring those who were just starting their careers, showing them that quiet confidence, skill, and dedication could command respect in any room. As Sarah continued to navigate the event, admirals subtly shifted their focus toward her, recognizing her value not only as a participant, but also as a strategic thinker and leader. Some sought her insights on minor matters, testing her judgment and perspective. Each interaction reinforced the image she had already created. A young officer whose abilities went far beyond what anyone could judge from appearances alone. She had demonstrated that competence and authority were earned through experience, dedication, and composure, not by asserting power or seeking attention. Even the SEAL, now fully aware of the situation, approached her cautiously. His respect for her had grown to a level that was palpable. He offered a nod of acknowledgement, and for the first time, he addressed her not as a junior officer or a subject of playful teasing, but as a peer whose experiences and achievements demanded recognition. In that single gesture, the SEAL's attitude encapsulated the transformation that had occurred in the room. Sarah had turned skepticism, humor, and casual dismissal into respect and admiration, all through her quiet presence and the subtle communication of her extraordinary record. The ripple effect continued. Officers who had only observed from a distance began to reassess their assumptions. Those who had thought of Sarah as just another lieutenant now saw her as a role model, a figure whose professionalism, courage, and composure set a standard for others to follow. She had become a symbol of excellence, not because she boasted about her missions, but because her quiet confidence and measured actions conveyed the truth about her capabilities. By the end of the event, the impact of Sarah's presence was undeniable. She had achieved something extraordinary. She had transformed the perceptions of everyone in the room without ever raising her voice or seeking recognition. Admirals, officers, and the SEAL alike had come to understand that true authority and respect are not commanded. They are earned through competence, calm, and quiet confidence. Sarah had earned that respect in abundance, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. This moment marked a turning point, not just in the event but in the way Sarah was regarded within the Navy. She had shown that appearances can be deceiving, that skill and courage often lie beneath the surface, and that true leadership is demonstrated through actions, presence, and subtle influence. Her quiet authority had reshaped the room, inspiring admiration, recognition, and respect from the highest-ranking officers to the newest recruits. Lieutenant Sarah Miller had not only proven her worth, she had become a symbol of what it truly means to serve with excellence, courage, and integrity. The room had settled into a quiet hum, but the energy surrounding Lieutenant Sarah Miller was undeniable. Every officer, from the youngest recruit to the most senior admiral, had been impacted by what had just happened. A simple joke had turned into a revelation. A subtle tattoo had revealed decades of courage and skill, and a quiet, unassuming lieutenant had earned the respect of everyone in the room. Sarah, however, moved with the same calm composure as always, knowing that true recognition needed no celebration. She had already made her mark, and now it was time to carry that presence forward, subtly yet powerfully. Even the Navy SEAL who had teased her moments earlier was now watching with deep respect. He had come expecting a playful, light-hearted interaction, only to discover that the young lieutenant standing before him had accomplishments and experiences far beyond his imagination. His initial amusement had been replaced by admiration and humility. He realized that he had learned a valuable lesson. True strength and capability are often invisible until revealed at the right moment, and assumptions based on appearances can be dangerously misleading. The playful humor of the moment had faded, replaced by a genuine acknowledgement of Sarah's extraordinary abilities. The admirals, who had quietly observed the situation unfold, were now openly showing signs of respect. Some whispered to each other, sharing fragmented stories they had heard about Sarah's missions. Covert operations that had required precision, bravery, and intelligence that few could even comprehend. Others nodded subtly in recognition, acknowledging the presence of someone whose experience rivaled or exceeded their expectations. The room, once filled with casual chatter and polite formality, had transformed into a space of awe and admiration. Sarah had done this without a single boast or dramatic announcement. Her calm authority, combined with the symbolic significance of her tattoo, had spoken louder than any words ever could. What was most remarkable about Sarah's impact was the way she achieved it. She hadn't sought attention or validation. She had simply been herself, moving confidently through the room, allowing the quiet power of her accomplishments to shine through subtle cues. Every gesture, every measured movement, every calm glance conveyed her experience and competence. Officers who had underestimated her were now thinking differently, reconsidering their assumptions, and realizing that her youth and quiet demeanor had hidden an extraordinary strength. Even those who had initially laughed at the Navy SEAL's joke were now silent, observing Sarah with a mixture of astonishment and respect. The atmosphere had shifted so completely that no one felt the need to speak carelessly or make small talk. In a room full of people who were accustomed to authority, power, and command, Sarah had emerged as a figure whose quiet presence demanded recognition. She had demonstrated that authority doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it is felt, observed, and understood instinctively. As she continued to move gracefully through the gathering, Sarah interacted politely with various officers, offering a smile or a nod, always calm and composed. Admirals who had once regarded her as a minor participant now sought her opinion on matters, subtly testing her judgment and perspective. Junior officers, inspired by the shift in attention toward her, whispered among themselves about her accomplishments, realizing that she was someone they could look up to, someone who embodied the combination of skill, courage, and humility they aspired to emulate. The SEAL, now fully aware of her accomplishments, approached her with genuine respect. His demeanor had changed entirely. There was no hint of humor or teasing. Instead, he acknowledged her quietly, perhaps with a nod or a few words of sincere admiration. That gesture, though small, symbolized the transformation in the room. It represented a recognition that Sarah's experience, bravery, and professionalism had earned her respect not only from her peers and superiors, but also from the most skilled and confident individuals among them. The room's energy had shifted permanently. Even those who had not fully understood the significance of the tattoo could feel the weight of Sarah's presence. They sensed that she was someone extraordinary, someone who carried not only skill but also integrity, courage, and leadership. She had become a symbol of excellence, not because she had boasted about her achievements, but because her actions, demeanor, and quiet confidence communicated them clearly. She had proven that true capability and respect are earned through experience, consistency, and subtle demonstration of competence rather than loud self-promotion. By the end of the event, Sarah had achieved something remarkable. She had taken a situation that could have been awkward or trivial, a Navy SEAL's joke, and transformed it into a moment of recognition, respect, and admiration. She had commanded attention and authority in a room full of high-ranking officers, admirals, and elite operatives, all while remaining humble, composed, and understated. Her quiet power, reinforced by the symbolic significance of her tattoo, had made a lasting impression that would not be forgotten by anyone present. Sarah's story in that room became a lesson in leadership, courage, and perception. She demonstrated that appearances can be deceiving, that true skill and bravery often remain hidden until revealed, and that quiet confidence can inspire admiration and respect more powerfully than any dramatic display. She left the gathering not by seeking recognition, but by simply continuing her work, carrying on her mission, and embodying the qualities that had earned her this extraordinary respect. As Sarah exited the room, officers whispered her name, the SEAL nodded silently, and admirals reflected on the unexpected display of skill and authority. Her legacy in that moment was clear. She had proven that real strength is quiet, courage is understated, and respect is earned, not demanded. Lieutenant Sarah Miller had not only commanded the room. She had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed her, inspiring admiration and respect that would last far beyond the evening itself.